Hi everyone, it's Graham. Welcome back to Truckerman Reads. Yesterday's video, I tried recording in the car, just some audio on the way home a couple of times and it kept going wrong. And so when I got home, I went out to the shop to record a couple of videos and those went wrong too for different reasons. And so just took it as a sign. It's like, all right, you're just not going to post a video today. I did upload one of them and it went live this morning and I hadn't proofed the audio, and as soon as it went live I was like, oh crap, my freaking beard is too long and it kept hitting the microphone. So I wasn't going to subject it to bad audio. Just as like, well, okay, I'll redo it later, whatever. The subject du jour is partially about comic books, but in a larger sense it's about lore expansion. I got 4 books to review here, and then I want to cover a broader subject that's been on my mind the last couple of weeks. So the 4 books are last week's polls, and then a Marvel Premiere Collection of The Winter Soldier by Ed Brubaker. We'll start with the lesser of the comic books. The G.I. Joe Energon Universe title is doing, I guess, one of its own kind of mini events, but they must have accelerated production for some reason, and these books are coming out every 2 weeks instead of every month. So I just got one last week, and I'll get another one next week until this little 5-issue mini run is over. It's a pocket conflict called the Dreadnought War. There are, I guess, like sub-factions in G.I. Joe. I'm not as familiar with all of that, and one of these groups is the Dreadnoks, a bunch of Cajun swamp boys that are affiliated with Cobra, but they cross swords with them from time to time. And Destro manipulates one of these Dreadnought guys into having a beef with Cobra Commander, and while that's going on, the Joes attack, and so it's kind of a melee of like a Mexican standoff that went hot, and like everybody's fighting each other. And the first issue of that was cool, and then we're getting more of the whole, like, the G.I. Joes trying to figure out what's going on with the Transformers. Like, I'm very interested in more of that. I want more of this. I want more development on that front. Like, the whole reason I'm reading Energon Universe is because of the Transformers, and now G.I. Joe is accelerating that particular part of the storyline, so that's cool. The next one was Rook Exodus, issue 8. I just can't praise this series enough. Out of all of the publishers that I'm buying from, Ghost Machine is my favorite, and out of all of their titles that I'm subscribed to, Rook Exodus is the best. And it just continues to like find ways to escalate and do something cool and new. And in this one, we're in volume 2, and they're looking for Direwolf's father, who was also a warden. He was the warden of Wild Dogs, but he went feral, and he never takes his mask off, and he like doesn't even talk anymore. They need to find him because he's the last engineer who knows how to repair the world engine. And if they can get it repaired, they can basically save the planet that they're on. But he's pissed off a lot of people while he's in this bloodhound rage. And it's just cool. Just go read it. Like, go read volume 1 and then start picking up the issues for volume 2. It's so cool. The art, the concept, I love all of it. And then the third comic was Absolute Superman number 13. Sorry, school bus is slowing down here, but he's not throwing the reds on, so I'm not sure what's going on. And this is going to be one of the instigators of this larger discussion on lore expansion. So with it being issue 13, volume 1 and 2 are wrapped up, and this is Superman told a little bit differently, and he's going up against 2 very powerful villains who are working in conjunction with each other. There's Brainiac, and this absolute version of Brainiac is quite a handful. And he's in charge of the absolute version of the Peacemaker Corps, an employee of whom was Lois Lane, and she kind of rebelled against the Peacemaker Corps to help Superman. On the other side of the equation, you have Ra's al Ghul, and his daughter Talia was running the Omega Men, and one of the Omega Men's minions was Jimmy Olsen. He defects against them for the same kind of similar reasons to Lois. Like, after he crosses paths with Superman, he's like, wait, there's a better way of doing this, and I want to switch sides to the right side. And so Ra's al Ghul, he's got his own plans for Superman, and he's laid siege to Smallville, where in this chronology, like Clark Kent still grew up there, but the circumstances were a little bit different. But he's going back there because it's like the one place that he has that's a home, and he's defending it from Ra's al Ghul's armies while Brainiac is also working his machinations in the background. So there's like, it's Superman with the brakes off, and it's a little bit more sci-fi, a little bit more space fantasy. I just love this take on the character, and at the same time, it's respecting 90 years of mythos and lore that have come before it. Lois Lane is still writing, and she's still the daughter of a general. She's an army brat, but still very feminine, and she can have this take charge personality when she needs to. And Jimmy is a subordinate, but that's also the role that he has in the original timeline. He's the go-getter in the office at the Daily Planet. The Daily Planet, such as it is, doesn't exist in this world, but they do take on a journalistic role from within the siege of Smallville as they're trying to get the word out to the outside world about what's going on. Martha Kent is in the story. We got a flashback glimpse to Pa Kent and to Sam Lane, and like it's all there, and it's integrated well into this version of the story that is consistent with the mythos in the right ways, but is still finding ways to stand on its own 2 feet. And I love that. I'm a major Superman homer, so I'll acknowledge that bias. But out of all the Absolute titles that I've read and that I'm still reading, this one is my favorite. And I really like Absolute Batman. I love Absolute Superman. And then the final one, like I said, there's this Marvel Premiere Collection of the original Winter Soldier story from 2004. These premiere editions, these big white and black, and they're kind of thick paperbacks. I guess they're collections of very popular stories with central characters that Marvel released a bunch of this year. They've got a Hawkeye and a Black Panther and a Wolverine one. I think they also compiled Civil War into one of these books. I'll have to grab that later. I have read Civil War, but I didn't read any of the Winter Soldier comics. When the movie came out in 2014, which is the single best MCU movie out of all of them, I wanted to read more about the character, but I had a hard time, like, okay, where do I find the back issues and all of that? I wasn't active in comics online so much, so I didn't know where to go to find all that, so I just didn't bother with it. But this book has everything from conception to execution all in one. And a lot of the story beats that were in the Winter Soldier movie were adapted and integrated from this run of comics. Of a special value in it is, like, there's a cool foreword from Sebastian Stan talking about what it means to him to play the Winter Soldier and what it was like to get the call. He got the call on April Fool's Day in 2010 or something, maybe 2011. So yeah, it was 2010, and it was from Feige, but he was like, okay, it's April Fool's Day though. So that was just amusing little anecdote. But the real value of the foreword here was from Ed Brubaker, who talked about reading the old and original Captain America comics and seeing old Captain America cartoons when he was an army brat growing up on different bases where they had limited cartoon selections. And in those original stories, there was a character named Bucky, and he was Cap's sidekick, and he lived on the base, and he was a martial arts expert. He didn't have the super soldier serum, but he went on missions with Cap. He didn't know that Bucky was later retconned from the Cap continuity, and when he grew up and he got into creating comics and going to conventions, and he got to meet Stan Lee, and he got to ask him, he's like, hey, why isn't Bucky in the comics anymore? And apparently he was told, is like, no, dude, that guy got retconned out. Don't ask me about Bucky. And that always it was like a burr under his saddle. He's like, but I like Bucky. Well, Brubaker goes on to have success in comics, and then he gets his 1 in a million shot, once in a lifetime chance to actually write a Captain America book. And he's like, all right, I want to do something with Bucky, but I got to make it work. It's got to be right. And so he created the story of, we didn't know that Bucky survived in 1945, and that he was found by the Soviets, and that they put an arm on him, but that his brain didn't work right. He didn't remember who he was. But then he encounters Cap in the field, and that starts to stir things up. Like, that was Ed Brubaker's idea. And he wrote this incredibly successful storyline starting in 2004 when I was in Spain. And I wasn't reading comics or anything. So that's all on him. And 10 years later, that got adapted into The Winter Soldier. Now, I want to say it was around 2014, 2015 or so when the first comics came out that had Sam Wilson as my brain keeps saying Captain Falcon, like the Falcon version of Captain America, whatever. And then 10 years later, that ends up becoming part of a Captain America movie. Like, okay, fine, like they'd established that pattern. I've made my thoughts on Sam Wilson, Captain America, pretty well known, but whatever, it is what it is. But it was hardly the first example of taking a 10-year-old, but very, I guess, well-received or popular, at least, idea from the comics and adapting it to the film. There were a couple of things that were different. Obviously, like with the movie script, they had to make it rely on everything that had come before it in the Marvel movies. In the book, they're going up against Red Skull. There is a cosmic cube, like the blue Tesseract thing. It does something different from what it did in the movies. They changed that. But if you're familiar with the movies and you saw that film, which, like I said, it is the best single Marvel film, check out this premiere collection, this premiere edition of the Winter Soldier story. It's so good. I'm really glad that they put this out in a place where it's easy for me to just read the entire thing from beginning to end, and that the writer's forward gave it some context that allowed me to catch up on why this was so important. And man, the writer's passion really came through, which is always something that I value in reading and that you can never fake. The reason I mention all of this, especially with the Absolute Superman storyline and with Captain America Winter Soldier, is when you're writing in an established IP, you have a responsibility to handle it well, but you do also kind of have a duty to develop it and maybe add something to it, but you've got to be careful not to screw it up. I think there's a certain kind of almost reverence that you have to have when you're approaching it. You definitely can't run into it and say, like, okay, well, I'm going to add my specific ethos to this. I'm going to make it about all of the things that are important to me. Yeah, you've got a particular talent or skill set that you're bringing to the table, but you can't make it about you. That was a lot of the beef that Star Wars fans had with the sequel trilogy, is that those were extremely poorly handled. And I still remember Christopher Rocchio saying online that, when there were all these arguments about, like, oh no, we as fans don't acknowledge the sequel trilogy because it doesn't respect the lore. And Rocchio, he was like, no, these movies are lore now. The lore is just silly. And because it was mishandled for whatever reason. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. But that was a popular and well-loved series that was... It was just mishandled. Like, that's the wrong way to go about taking something that's already established and saying, like, we want to make more of it, but they didn't do it very well at all. If you've got not even necessarily a simple concept, but an established one, understand what the boundaries are and work within that, and don't try to steer it outside of that. Over the last couple of weeks, and I wrote about this on Substack, I watched all 7 Alien movies, starting with the one in 79 and going up through Alien Romulus from last year. And I had takeaways from each one. All 7 movies had at least one thing in them that I liked. But my general take on it was that obviously over the decades, it started to go into weird directions under the auspices of lore expansion. And it didn't land right. It didn't strike the same chord. It was, especially Prometheus and Covenant, were trying to be almost something else entirely in the exploration of the origins of the xenomorphs as a virus. It was weird, and it didn't work. And that's before we even talk about Alien Resurrection from '97. Like, that was just a mess of a movie. The writers and the director on Alien Romulus took the right approach, where they said, okay, well, why don't we kind of go back to formula? What are the best stories in the Alien chronology? That's Alien and Aliens from '79 and from '86. Okay, what did they do right? What did they establish? What are we going to build on? Are we going to change anything? If so, what? And how is it going to be justified? Is it right or wrong to do so? Alien Romulus was a good movie. I have a couple little nitpicks with it here and there, but in the context of all seven, it is the closest to the original two in terms of, tone, execution, lore, characters, setting, all of that stuff. It did all of that really well. There was a bit more of a respectful approach to adapting and expanding that lore. I'm going to go do the same thing now, with the Predator films. I want to watch those because, Predator Badlands just came out. I'm sure some of those are going to be bad. I'll have an analysis when that's all said and done. If you're working for a studio and they give you an IP to handle, know what the lines are and color vibrantly and brightly within those lines. Respect the lore. Don't limit it, to just the absolute basics of the lore, but stay within the boundaries of the lore. The first Predator movie, it is burly tough guy commandos fighting a predator in the jungle, but that's not the only thing that it can ever be. But you can take it too far in a weird direction, and after I see the other movies, I'm sure that I'll have some analysis on what that could be. But that's my approach on lore. Like, you can expand it, and over time, with different writers getting into the fray, you'll have some bad additions here and there. Not everybody's going to follow these rules, but the best and most successful ones will. And I'm seeing that in comics with Jason Aaron writing Absolute Superman, and with the care that Ed Brubaker brought to Captain America when he wrote Winter Soldier. Anyway, thanks for watching. Drive safe. See you out there.